Hello, everybody. This is Kops Office Hours. Today is Friday, January 31st. I am your moderator facilitator, Justin Santa Barbara. I work at Google. A reminder, this meeting is being recorded, will be put on the internet and is subject to our Kubernetes code of conduct. So please be a nice and respectful person. And we do have an agenda. I pasted a link in the Zoom chat. I will repaste it because I never know whether Zoom deletes those things. And then please do put items on the agenda if you would like to get to them. And we have a bunch of stuff on the agenda already. Please feel free to put your name in the attendees list if you would like to. And otherwise, I suggest we get right into it. Peter, you're not here, or you are here. I don't know. You say you're not here, but I see you. Do you have the first item on the agenda? Do you want to talk through it?
Yes. Basically, the default storage class that kops adds to clusters for AWS does not have the volume binding mode field set. And there's interest in setting that to wait for first consumer. An issue is that it's an immutable field. And so we're hoping to figure out a good way to get that applied.
Would you like to describe, for those who might be less familiar, what the difference in behavior is, please?
I don't know myself. I was more adding this to the agenda for...
Cool. As I understand it, it has to do with, it boils down, the root cause was the zonal allocation. So this boils down to when you have a stateful set with persistent volumes, you probably want them to spread across multiple zones. We had some heuristics in there a long time ago. They tweaked it so that instead, and those heuristics were that would basically create the volume spread across the zones. And then the pods would follow the volumes. And they tweaked it so that now they don't create the volumes up front, and instead they schedule the pods. And then when the first pod needs a volume is created, it looks at the zone of the pod and says, aha, now I will create a volume in that particular zone. It is a difference in that if you have like a zone that is unavailable temporarily, it will behave differently. But it is probably the right thing to do. I don't know whether because if we manage to change it in place somehow, if we don't manage to change it, if we don't manage to change it in place, then users that upgrade will have a different behavior than users that don't, which is, I think, the challenge.
What I think we need to do is basically abandon the current name and create a new one with a new name, just like we do with default.
Yes, we would probably... creating a second name is a good idea. I don't know what we would do about the current name. We would
take off the default annotation and just leave it behind, just like we do for default.
That seems reasonable. I guess it should be the default. Has Upstream made it the default?
Don't know if Upstream has made it default. We currently take the default and disable it and leave it there. Or make it. There's one that's called default, and we remove its annotation, making it the default. And so we have one that's called default that's not used.
Well, it can be used by name, but yes. Because we know that there are many manifests out there in the wild that refer to these things by various names. So we can't really we have to be very careful about changing the behavior significantly of one of those. But it is, and we also don't want to just delete them, because otherwise workloads will presumably fail to work on kops clusters. I'd be in favor of, I think what you're proposing, John, where we essentially create a new name. And I don't know whether we should make it the default yet, but that could be the
I think
journey.
There's no reason not to make it a default, because I don't see that anyone would really need the old behavior.
I am very biased because I wrote the old behavior, but yes. Yes, I'm happy to follow people's. It would certainly need it should have a release note about the like if we're going to change the default. But I'm happy to bow to other people's opinions about which one should be the default. But yes, I certainly agree we should, because it's immutable, and because we probably don't want to change we don't want to have split brain type thing. On versions, we should create a new one and then whatever people want in terms of default.
Someone asks SIG storage to make it mutable, because I can't see any reason for it to be immutable.
That's also a valid thing we could do.
Because it just causes a lot of problems having immutable fields.
It does.
One question. Not sure if anyone used the volume expansion with the storage class. Not sure if it's default now or not, but if we change this and modify it a bit, maybe we add the allow expansion option so that people can resize volumes.
Is that one also immutable?
I don't know. I was just looking at my config. I remember I put it a while ago and it seemed like something useful.
Is it supported by GB2, or is there any downside?
Sorry?
Is there any downside to?
I don't know. People that have strict policies may not want to resize their volumes.
Last I looked, I thought that was in beta. We use it, we enable it on our clusters, but and the field is mutable, I believe. I'm trying to find the code now. So I can look that up, but I don't think we need to make that change at the same time as this, because we adjust that real time on our clusters. So I think that's, we can do that either way. But I like it. I mean, it's a feature I think a lot of kops users would like.
Yeah, I can do it on my clusters easily, but it's best to be by default. I don't think it breaks anything.
On the old feature versus new one, I actually have a comment now that I've been looking through it. I probably would want the old feature, as in when my users create pods, they may create a few hundreds that need volumes, and waiting for the first consumer would not be an issue if AWS was actually fast when you call out to their APIs. So the configuration to have either way would be very nice. So
I do think in general it's a good idea to refer to storage classes by name if you care. But yes, so it sounds like we're at least in agreement on the naming front, and we'll have a discussion about creating a newly named one, and then we'll have a discussion around the default, and probably, as you suggest, John, loop and SIG storage about why is this immutable in the first place, and all these things. Should it be the default? That sound good? Cool. Oh yes, and because we believe expansion is a mutable field, i.e. can be changed, then we don't necessarily need to include it in the same.
True.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. Next on the agenda, Peter, I don't know if you're still here. Okay.
The AWS VPC CNI provider supports configuring various settings through environment variables. For example, you can keep a warm pool of IPs or ENIs attached to instances that are not yet in use by pods. I know there have been requests on Slack and GitHub issues to configure that, and so I decided to make that more flexible by allowing any environment variables. So just looking for feedback on the new field name, basically, and if anyone wants to move that forward.
Well, it seems environment is what kops uses in one other place. Kubernetes itself seems to use env. We could be consistent with either.
Where do we use environment? Sorry. Somewhere I can grab for. Okay.
Yeah.
Rodrigo, I know you have a similar PR.
It's exec hooks is where we use environment.
Which is technically not a pod, right? So that's at least some saving grace. Okay. Rodrigo, which one did you use?
we talking about the environment variable PR for the etcd?
Yes.
Yeah, that one I just use env, and I did so because etcd itself, as the way it is currently, uses all envs variables for configuration, so I figured I'd keep the same pattern.
I would certainly be in favor of following the Kubernetes pattern rather than whatever we may have done accidentally in the hooks.
Yeah, I think that's the way forward.
Okay. I will update it to env.
And did you, Rodrigo, did you use name value or did you, like it looks like looking at this PR, it's a map of string. Did you use a map of, well, did you use a list of name value structs or did you use
It's just a key value string, no checks on it because there's so many env variables. I don't know if we want to check every single potential thing that a user can set. So.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I use, if I recall correctly, the pod or the container env is not a map string. It is a list of name value pair or something.
So yeah, it gets converted at the etcd manager level itself. Sorry, it gets converted in kops when we're creating the manifest. Sorry,
So I was debating between whether a map or a list and decided to do map because I think the main benefit of the list is you can do value from and reference secrets or config maps, but none of the VPC CNI providers values I would consider secret. So I don't know if that's necessary, but I could certainly switch it if we want.
I worry we're going to end up with a third. It's just my concern, right? Like, bad enough that we accidentally have two, but like someone will come up with a use case that wants to refer to some other thing or...
And then would that require importing?
Oh, no, we certainly wouldn't import the... Well, we don't have to. Yeah, we just like reproduce the schema. It would be my suggestion. Would you both be open to going in that direction? So we like basically make it look like pod or container.
Sounds good.
Any other opinions?
Sounds good to me. I like it.
And we'll long-term change environment to env, wherever environment may be.
And for the record, Peter, I'm really glad you did this. This is this is helpful. We need to tweak a lot of those too.
Cool.
Great. Hakman, you have a discussion about 118 alpha 1, which I could give an update on the releases and where we got to with them. Maybe that's a good...
Yeah, I saw that you wrote it below, but also wanted to discuss that point. You said last time that you may want to create an image for Buster, optional one. So just wanted to remind you about that one.
Thank you for the gentle nudge. I will try to do so. I did not get to it in this period. I apologize, but I will try to do it in the next sprint.
Okay.
But yes, so this is a good time. I'll give a quick update. I did some releases and we got 115.1 out, and I think that one's a good one, and that's good because that's the actual like release. On 116.0 beta 1, I forgot to bump the kops controller version as I also did in 117.0 alpha 2. So those both work, but we're running an older version of kops controller. We're running the version tagged 115.0 alpha 1, if I recall correctly. So for both of those, I am proposing to do another bump fairly quickly, just to include those and any other issues that we want to do. I know also that like something else got into 117, something else merged into the 117 branch that I probably should have waited for, but like just missed the window. So that will now make what will then be 117.0 alpha 3 and 116.0 beta 2. If anyone else has anything they want to make sure gets in there, please merge it if it isn't already on the branch.
There is the next item, I think, on the list about the core DNS regression. So I wrote there that maybe we want to think about it, and if we do a quick release to grab that small upgrade.
That sounds good. There was was it Guy? Was it you that pointed out the schema change?
Yeah, but so the schema change that the fields they removed support for were marked deprecated in December 2016. I feel it's very unlikely that anyone's using them still, but
Is it too soon? I'm kidding.
yeah.
Okay. This was like the pod DNS names or something, which I never even knew we could do.
Yeah, ditto. I looked at it and went, wow, did not know that was possible, but fine.
Okay, so I think that one's safe. So we should probably get this backported. That's a good call. I don't know if there's a there is 8452. So I'll put those as blockers on our 117 and 116.
So we can backport it easily. It's just to be accepted first.
Yeah.
And I think also Guy did some PR that you can specify whatever version of core DNS you want. Right?
So to be honest, it doesn't necessarily need to be cherry picked back, because I think we could instead put a regression note and say, if you want to override this and get back to your metric, you could override the image.
But meant that if someone has the problem with that subnet, whatever DNS, can just go back and run whatever version of DNS they want.
That's true. That's a good point.
Great. And then on the other releases, I think the other ones that were on the calendar were 114.2 was proposed, but I didn't really see anything in there that would necessarily warrant a bump. I don't know if anyone had anything in particular that they were thinking of. So I did not do that yet, but if we feel strongly about that, we can certainly do that. But we have 115 coming out as well. I'm going to pull this for a minute in case anyone wants to. But 1.8.
I think I said about 114 because there was something from Marcus that he wanted to backport 114. But it's up to him if he wants a nudge.
Okay. Well, if I see a backport, if I see a cherry pick go into 114, then we can certainly do it. I would suggest we focus on 115 now instead, unless there's some reason to. I don't know of a reason to. 118.0 alpha 1, I cut but did not push. So you'll see there's a tag, there's a release note, there's a commit including that, but the challenge is it doesn't work because, so we're jumping around on the agenda, but this is, I guess, 2 down on the agenda, which is that there's this issue with permissions. And so we're going to, once we figure out what we want to do there, then we can fix that and cut 118.0 alpha 2, because I did tag it. So we're not going to change the tags. So we'll just, alpha 1 will not exist or will not really exist. And alpha 2 will be the one that we get out there. And we can talk about how to fix that, I guess, in sequence.
Okay. I was hoping to get the next thing into 118 alpha so that we don't have the Docker health check if someone tries containerd. But it's just something that delays 1 minute and runs in the background, so shouldn't be something broken.
Yeah, and alphas are we should certainly get that in. Alphas don't close the branch either. So, and we're going to keep it on master as well. So it's not going to be, we're not going to create the 118 branch yet. We're going to keep the branch open for features. So we have 2 months till the release, I think 2 months till the release of 118. So maybe is that true? I don't know. We have around between 1 and 2 months till the release of 118. So it's a little early to close for features right now. So, but yes, we should also get your fix in. I think I did follow up and find out a lot of the functionality of the health check has moved to the node problem detector. And so we don't necessarily need to run health check going forwards, but we probably should start to run a problem detector at some stage.
Okay. What about this? Because I think it was a bit unclear. Do you still want to keep it for some time and remove it in case someone still needs it? Or we just remove it and that's it?
I think it absolutely should not be on containerd. If I only choose containerd, it should not be on. My feeling is we should, so we have two choices when it comes to people that choose Docker, as it were. We can actively remove it from a certain version of kops, or sorry, from a certain version of Kubernetes, or we can just leave it in there and let the usage of Docker, people that choose Docker go down and people that choose containerd go up. And then gradually people will no longer be running the health check.
Do you feel that the approach that I did there is okay, or I should enable it by default? Right now is behind an option in Docker spec. So anyone that is disabled by default and anyone that wants it can go and say Docker health check true.
And I think it's going to come down to that sounds reasonable. It's just going to come down to, what are we doing about older versions of Kubernetes or of kops, and are we changing behavior for those users, and do we want to do that? So I can take another look at the PR around that, but that will be my concern.
I don't have a strong preference there, but I think it's your call. So
our call, we can figure it out, but yes.
So my worry last time was that I wouldn't want to run that in my production because it will hide some issues maybe, and it's unpredictable. I doubt that many people know that it exists in kops. So it's a component known only by the people that needed it. I don't doubt that it helps some others, but I don't know. It's hard to keep track of everything that runs like that.
That's very fair. Yes, it used to be very important because Docker used to lock up, and now I don't believe it fires very often, if at all. But certainly, yes, like we never know whether it's firing or not.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll certainly try to get that in, and I don't know if anyone else has any views. Like, no problem detector is the way to make it visible, right? Like, it addresses that visibility point, and it certainly addresses on the other hand, it also addresses it shouldn't fire because as far as I know, we don't actually do anything with no problem detector. So no problem detector won't do anything when it sees this problem. It will just mark the node as bad or something.
It restarts Docker. That's what
No problem detector does?
Oh, health check. So
yeah,
a bit different.
Right. So yes. So we risk losing this behavior where we do recover. We don't like that the behavior is invisible. We don't think it's needed anymore. We just need to decide whether we want to change it in a release note for older versions, I think.
Mm-hmm. For older versions, you mean older versions of Kubernetes or of kops?
Older version, so people running a newer version of like kops 118 with Kubernetes 116.
Okay. You're saying that if they do for them to be enabled by default.
Exactly. We probably shouldn't, we try not to change the behavior for them. Mm-hmm. We can do it if we think it's worth it, but it's not clear that it's worth it to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks. Does anyone else had a comment there? All right. Let's see. We've jumped around the agenda a little bit. Let's see. We did cover the 118 alpha 1. Should we try an early alpha? Yes. Get those bus images going? Yes. Move Docker health check to Docker Builder. We talked a little bit about that. I think we're going to follow up a little bit more. The core DNS cache metrics regression. Guys, is there anything we did not talk about on that front?
I don't think so. I think I suppose I'll just cherry pick once that's merged. Can cherry pick back to or Matteo can cherry pick back to 115. I don't think that's an issue. I've raised it upstream in KK as well. Yeah, that's pretty much us covered.
Yeah, which is, and 115 is the furthest back where we cherry picked to 165, which introduced the regression. Is that right?
Yes.
That sounds great. Thank you. Okay, and now next on the agenda is the underlying issue with the 118.0 alpha 1, which was we had two changes that landed. Technically, I don't know when exactly they landed because we were running the old version of kops controller, but two changes when I updated that we hit together, which is we run the Docker image under an unprivileged user, or the Docker image is built with an unprivileged user, ID 1000, if I recall correctly, but not root. And we are also writing a log file, var log, which is bind mounted using a host path volume mount, and that is var log kops controller.log. And by default, that file is created by Kubernetes. And when Kubernetes creates it, it creates it with It creates it with the permissions that only root can write to it. And so I don't know how we want to deal with this going forwards. I think, first of all, I think it means we likely have a missing test, although maybe not. But depending on how the version thing went down, we might have a missing test, and I want to make sure that we're actually testing the kops controller is coming up correctly. I think, should we even try to run kops controller under a non-root user would be one question, because it's going to end up pretty privileged anyway. If it's going to get the CA key anyway, which it probably will, then it's basically root in the cluster no matter what we do. And then the other topic is, in general, how should we do these log files? And honestly, I don't know what the right approach is. I guess we have to make them world writable, but I don't know if there's some trick. So I don't know.
Could make them owned by user 1000.
Can we do that? And then we would basically, like we do well-known ports, we do well-known user IDs or something, and say kops controller is 1000 and DNS controller is 1001 and so on.
Yeah, right now they're both 1000, but we can change that.
Yes. How do people do this in the real world in production?
Well, right now I set everything to 1000, but
okay.
But then the requirement I get from our security folks is can't be root unless it really needs it.
Okay. Oh, so yeah, so okay, that makes sense. And then we could try making it owner 1000. That seems better than making it world writable. So it would remain. So I put up a speculative PR where we make it we pre-create the log file, we make it world writable, but we could certainly change it to user 1000. I don't know if anyone has any better approach that I'm not aware of. Otherwise, that seems pretty good.
So the end-to-end tests have been succeeding and pulling the controller log artifact. And I pasted a link to one of them in the chat. So this might be distribution specific. Do you know?
This I tested it on kops with our default, AWS with our default image. So it would still be stretch. Not Buster yet, sadly.
Is E2E running the built kops controller?
E2E should be running the built kops controller that it builds itself and uploads to a GCS bucket. Oh, yes. It was running the old tagged version, yes. I don't know.
Something to check.
Yes, there's definitely something there. I think it'll be interesting to see whether E2E breaks once I've done the tag, because yeah, it might still have been running 115.0 alpha 1, but then I think other things that are broken. So I don't know. Something definitely has gone on there.
It'd be nice if kops controller outputted its built version in the logs so we could more easily tell.
I will do that, or we can do that. But yes, it should definitely output version. Make a note of that. Oh, I can't make a note of it because because Zoom won't let me. Okay. All right, but I think if we make the file, pre-create the file in NodeUp with the user 1000, we don't technically need to start handing out user IDs yet, so we can keep it as 1000 because DNS controller does not currently mount anything. We can think about doing so as well. And when we do that, we'll give kops controller 1000 to keep it compatible. Or we could just move right now to 1001. Any opinions?
Let's go to 1001.
1001.
Because it needs its own.
Because it might need.
It particularly needs one, and 1000 can probably be the don't care.
That sounds like a good approach. I like that. All right, so we'll go to kops controller. We'll go to 1001. Kops controller to 1001. Kops controller to output log file chmod 600 chown 1001, and kops controller to output version in logs. And SHA. Okay. I have a quick demo I wanted to show, but let's go to that at the end. So we have, it's not going to take very long because it's very high level. But Rodrigo, do you want to talk about N variables and variable configs into etcd?
Sure, I'll revise the kops BR, but I just wanted to bring the etcd manager to your attention, Justin, because you're the only one with merge privileges there, I believe, still. So when you have a chance, would love to check it out. Thank you.
I will definitely do that, and we can probably also fix that as well, but yes. Cool. And then, Hakwan, you brought up something around launch templates needed for tagging root volumes in AWS.
We had this discussion last time or some time ago and did some more digging. Seems that we actually have launch templates added 1 year ago. It's used only for mixed instance policy. And if you want to use it for everything, it's behind the feature flag. Just wanted to know if the feature flag is still required, or I don't know, if we can do something about it, because this seems to be the future in the AWS. And if sounds okay to try to add the root volume tags this way via launch templates. I think this is how AWS recommends to do it.
Sounds to me like we should change the default to the feature flag. Default true.
I don't know how this is done or if it's stable enough to do it. So that's why I'm asking.
Can I just ask, would changing the feature flag enables the behavior, enables you to specify the behavior, or changes the, like, activates the behavior? Like, does it turn on launch templates, or does it enable me to turn on launch templates?
Launch templates are by default for mixed instance policy. So if you want to have auto-scaling group with mixed instance, you get that anyway. If you want to enable it for everything, like regular AWS setup, then you have to run it with this feature flag. At least this is how I understand it.
If that's the case, you probably should make it should have a field to control this, so that I can, if I'm not using mixed instance templates, I can still not use launch templates. Is that right? I agree with you.
Yeah,
the feature flag only affects non-mixed instance.
So it effectively allows you to choose to use the launch templates when you're not using mixed instance policies. I think there's probably reasons for people wanting to still use non-launch template, like use launch configurations with non-mixed instance policies. So yeah, I think inverting the flag would be my call as well.
The flag makes everything use launch templates all the time.
Should it be a field, I guess, is my question. Should we have a field? No field.
I think so. There's additional complexities with launch templates over launch configs. So I think there's probably good arguments for people wanting to stick with them.
But
So I think allowing people to use a field to say I want to stick with that behavior would be my feeling.
is it something different for someone that uses them in the kops configuration, or is just different for programming or setting them up? Because that's how I didn't dig that much into it, but seems that it should work pretty much the same for someone using kops. Not sure. Ryan, are you listening?
Yeah.
I think you're the one, not sure, but I think you're the one that added the launch templates. Or
Actually, I'm going to blame Rodrigo, but I did a bunch of work on it too.
It wasn't actually me. It was someone else. I just helped fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I helped blend the code. God, I forgot the guy's name who actually wrote it. I don't remember what that feature flag does. Truthfully, it's been a very long time since I looked
Yeah,
at
the feature flag just lets you flip it on for the when you're not using the mixed instance policies. I could see a reason to make it a field instead of a feature flag, just so you could specify which of your instance groups you may want to switch that on. If you weren't comfortable, making that change right away, you might not want to turn on all of them. But well, I mean, that being said, we've been running the mixed instance policies with the launch templates for almost 2 years now. If it's been 2 years or whatever it's been, over a year that's been in there, we've been running it. So
yeah,
it's stable.
we've been doing the same, and it's been fine. The one thing I'd be concerned about is how the conversion from a standard ASG to a launch template one would go with kops, and how we're making sure we're not destroying everything, especially for folks like us that use Terraform in the background, and Terraform loves destroying things. So
yeah, I remember we had this discussion about those resources in Terraform. So, yeah, with auto scaling groups is a little more tricky. I will look into it, and probably it would be something interesting to see how to implement. But I'm glad that it's pretty safe to move it from feature flag to an option in the config. So.
And I agree that we should. It sounds like we should make it the default, in that, like, it sounds like it's the future and we should try to get there. And I think it's the issue raised about like not breaking people's existing clusters feels important as well. So from that point of view, like, if we have, and we certainly can do that with a field. In other words, we can make it that like the default, if it's not specified, is the legacy behavior, but when you kops create instance group, it will choose the new field value.
I would suggest have somebody do a test to see what the behavior is.
That's a good idea
And
too.
if the behavior is okay, then I think we can just flip the feature flag. And if there's disruption, we need to go with the field.
Yeah, I will take a look into it and try to do it gradually, see if I can enable the tags, which would be nice. I think it's something to do for the next 2-4 weeks.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank
we
you.
can add an end-to-end test that tests the launch templates as well. That would be good.
Okay, sounds interesting.
Okay, I think there's the only other item on the agenda is the one we skipped over, which was sort of my proposed demo. I wanted to sort of show, I think, the workflow that I'm thinking about for add-ons, because I think it's debatable. Let's see if I can get this screen share going. And if anyone else wants to ever do demos of these things, please do. Let's see, share. I have way too many windows open. Share this one. Can you see a screen which says integrate add-ons?
Yep.
Yep.
Yay. Okay, very slow. Okay. My poor laptop. All right. I might have to do this quickly before my laptop melts. That didn't work. Oh, it did work. All right. So the intention is, let me jump to the punchline here, which is adding in the ability to manage essentially arbitrary objects, arbitrary Kubernetes objects alongside your Kubernetes cluster. So today we have two, sorry, kops cluster. We have two. We have the cluster and we have instance groups, two kinds, and you can essentially manage those. And we have things like replace and get, and we have workflows that have been created to manage those in Git. And to manage them locally, and so they also work in S3. And essentially, we're just saying we will now also be able to manage effectively arbitrary objects. And so we have two arbitrary objects here: a custom resource definition itself and an instance of that custom resource definition. And so in this case, and those objects, when we create the cluster, when we update the cluster, I should say, are applied to the cluster using the existing manifest mechanism. So essentially, you are able to extend your cluster creation to include additional objects, Kubernetes objects, and you already could effectively do this, but we are going to make it more, I guess, first class and likely have some additional integrations here. And of course, you can do things like YAML and like see the YAML. And so the add-on operators project is, I think, aiming to produce a lot of these operators. And so if you want the default configuration for node local DNS, you just do that, which is a sort of empty object. And this says, please install a node local DNS for me. But you can also do things like spec.version to specify an absolute version of a manifest. You can do things like spec.channel, I think, to say, like, I want to subscribe to the stable channel or the alpha channel of upstream. And we haven't really defined where those channels live yet, but the idea is we are essentially taking these sub objects that were previously in the cluster and effectively splitting them out into their own objects. So we are hopefully getting rid of the problem around versioning, where we always have to update kops. And then I've added this add argument in another PR where we, when you create a cluster, you can add some YAML files effectively alongside it. And so that's how you do arbitrary YAML. And then we'll probably have some nicer workflows around some of the built-in add-on operators. And then finally, another change, which is, I think, more problematic, is we build in some of those. So node local DNS has an operator for it, and we can build in those controllers, those operators, into kops controller, which means you don't have to end up with 50 different controllers running on your, or 50 different add-on operators running on your master, which can help with sort of resource utilization and everything. And sort of understanding what's going on. It does mean if we do that, we need a way to turn those off. Otherwise, we end up back with the versioning problem. But that is something we can, I guess, figure out. But that is, I think, I wanted to show that because I think that's the first time I've shown like the big picture of the model from like 10,000 feet and how it could work. And we want to get to a world where there's nothing special about these add-ons. And if you want to have add-ons or if you want to install your apps, that way you can do that. I'm not saying it's a great idea, but you can start to like manage whatever you want alongside your cluster. And it's not that it has to be built into kops. I'm trying to stop share. Feedback, welcome. Do we not like?
Well, I'm wondering how those auxiliary controllers are going to deal with assets and copying things locally.
Which sort of assets?
The kops assets phase, where you copy the stuff into a local registry.
That is a good piece of feedback. We need to make that work, and we also need to make it work seamlessly, right? So we both need to make that work for add-on operators, And we then need to like bring it into the kops workflow. That is great feedback. And I think I will write that down on the notes as like must fix. Feedback. How is it going to work with assets? It certainly does, and it does enable you to like the channels should just be a like something similar to what we actually have, where it's just like a HTTPS endpoint, and it would certainly be relatively straightforward to build your own channels if you wanted to. But that's me waving my hands. It's not an answer.
Yeah, I kind of go the other way. I don't want channels. I only use channels for the things that needed to bootstrap the cluster. And I'm using assets to make sure everything gets copied into our local registry. So I'm not pulling stuff from the internet in production.
That makes sense. Yeah, we need that, and we need it integrated. We need support for mirrors in both add-on operators, and then integrated into kops.
If I subscribe to a channel and then a new version is published, when is the new version applied to my cluster?
Fair point. I think we're going to need another field, which is like what to do in that case. There's like, I think the default should probably be like put it in status so that I can choose to update. But we might also have yellow mode where, we just apply it hot. But I can't imagine many people will run that in prod. But for dev, it might be super handy, right? Like if you're a core DNS developer and you want to like stay on the bleeding edge, then maybe you want that. But yes, for our prod clusters, I don't think any of us are going to run YOLO mode. And we are discussing a lot of these topics, I guess, in the add-on operators or the cluster add-ons working group of SIG Cluster Lifecycle, which meets Tuesdays at 9 or 10 a.m. Pacific. So in this time slot, or maybe an hour later, I forget. I think it's in this time slot every other Tuesday, being in 5 days or so, on like the 2nd or 3rd of Feb. I can't add, but you can pretty soon, on Tuesday anyway.
I wanted to ask something. Would this be something like an alternative to, let's say, Helm charts or something that we do there with that one?
It's a fair question. The answer, Helm is very much oriented towards applications. So like we're trying to keep this for, the intended use case is cluster add-ons. Like those pieces.
To what you need to run a cluster, not to run whatever MySQL chart or something.
That seems right. If people start using it for that, like that's up to them. But the use case we're optimizing for is like the cluster add-ons that share a sort of life cycle with the cluster. So like typically like things where when you update them, you might have to bounce nodes or something like that. That sort of thing, or where you think about it with the Kubernetes version.
Okay, and in this case, anyway, I guess they would need some templating feature, not in the sense that you could add some of the fields that come from kops, I don't know, cluster name or whatever, so that you can reuse. Or
yeah, you mean so like if you wanted to use an applications, you do hit templating, and that's one of the reasons we don't want to do applications in this way. The other
meant for the cluster, in some cases you need some setting that's in the cluster. So would this get you at least access to some of these settings or
yes values? I think that's we can figure out that workflow. The other thing is, because there's a controller, because there's code behind the scenes here, we have to date managed not to require it. There are some exceptions, but like we know we're going to hit some problems. But yes, we we're probably going to end up with some form of configuration object that can be passed around, but it would be nice not to have a tight coupling between kops and these cluster add-ons, so that you can add them at any time. You can sort of it just feels nicer, but we know that I think cluster.local, there's a trick to get, which is you can like look at your Etsy hosts. I think there's a trick to get your DNS you can find by the DNS IP you can get by looking at the service. I think one of the tricky ones is like the cluster CIDR. So like knowing the CIDR block. In theory, you can get that by like looking at the Kube API server pod, but that's just even more horrible. So I think in general, we want to stay away from that one. That's where we like get into tricky territory, but we're sort of still exploring the space. But it's I think what I wanted to sort of get at today was this model of breaking up the cluster object into typed CRDs that you can manage alongside, and that we would continue to support the workflow for for Git, like backing this by Git and backing it by files effectively, and the S3 workflow.
Okay.
So actually, I want to make a confession about how I use kops add-ons, or at least one of them. We installed the Cilium kops add-on to get the cluster on bootstrapped and running, and then we remove the manifests and then reinstall our Helm chart of Cilium. And then we have to neuter the channel or the kops add-on so kops doesn't try to upgrade it again. So we would rather kind of use Helm because we can roll back and do kind of have the Helm features, but so we kind of only use the channels for things that really need to be used to bring the cluster up.
It would be great to dig into that with you sometime. I don't know how much you're able to say on a public channel, but yeah. Finding out like the use of templating versus versions, and like you're certainly going to have control over versions, for example. But yes, it would be nice to, maybe I'll ping you offline or something.
Neuter ours from the start. We just bake in our CNIs into our image, so that we don't use any of the provided CNIs with kops. We just say we have our own.
Use the networking CNI option, which is the.
Do you foresee being able to? I think I know the answer based on this, but some of the discussion earlier about like for example the AWS CNI. Once it's in this world, the work that Peter was showing of the environment variables thing, would we be able to set that at some level where? Do you know what I'm asking? Where we're not inheriting specifically from the channel, but we're not changing it every time. But I do want to pull down the new version. I just want to be able to still have our specific env configs, for example.
Yeah, I would certainly imagine that the CRD would include things like the CRD for AWS VPC CNI, whatever it's called today, would include the nvar pass-through.
Got it. I see what you're saying.
I don't know whether, yeah.
It's handled at that.
So basically,
way,
like everything
not at like the manifest.
Layer. We're basically like breaking out of the cluster object into a new like top level object rather than like piling on more stuff into the cluster. And I think there's a migration path as well. So like, I think we should still continue to move forwards on like enhancements that modify cluster or a child object of cluster, in that this is how we discover the uses that are needed for these operators, and we can't. And when it comes time, we can have a mode where we treat the embedded object as creating a CRD rather than today, where we essentially expand that object ourselves.
Cool. Awesome.
So you mentioned like we would have a CRD for the AWS VPC CNI. Who would be responsible for maintaining that CRD and publishing it?
Yes, the dream is not us. the dream is that it would be the AWS VPC CNI project would itself maintain an operator. The theory is that they are the best people to understand how to operate their add-on. We know in the cluster add-ons project that we have to bootstrap this, and we know in kops that we've had to bootstrap this as well. So in the short term, we can certainly maintain these, but we shouldn't try. We would hope to not maintain ownership of that forever. Like, so if there was a requirement for something, then we could put it. The upstream project would do it. I think there is an interesting question there, which is like, what if they aren't willing to expose things that we know we need, and in which case we can fork it, not necessarily in kops, but somewhere. But it doesn't necessarily need to be, the goal is it doesn't need to be a kops, it doesn't need to be integrated into the kops workflow, even if it's the same team. We can have a separate release for it type thing. Cool, well, we are almost at time. I don't know if anyone else had any comments or any other things they want to bring up.
That was very cool. Thanks for showing.
Thank you.
One other quick question, Justin, on the add-ons. How are you going to deal with add-ons and specifying like which Kubernetes versions a new version may be compatible with? Is that going to be handled in the CRD, or is that going
to? Good question. I don't think we know entirely. We have this notion of. Yeah, we need to figure that out. We have a notion of an add-on having a requirement for something else and delaying. So in other words, like Knative, for example, is the one I always use. Knative relies on a particular version of, or Knative relies on Istio and is tested with a version of Istio. And so Knative needs a minimum version of Istio. And if you go to a future version of Knative, that's okay. Or we should not update Knative until Istio has been updated. So we assume that someone is like updating both of them, but you're right, we don't have a good answer for how we drive the updates. I think if you don't, yeah, well, we need to figure that out.
Okay.
All right, well, that is time. If there's nothing else, thank you all for a wonderful hour, and see everyone in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
There you go, guys.